Good evening. Welcome to the Way Wednesdays. It's a pleasure to be with you guys. Again, this is a outreach ministry of the Way congregation in Lakewood, Colorado, and we're doing everything virtually currently because we're not allowed to get together because of the coronavirus. Such a bummer. But tonight, I've got Pastor Gary in the waiting room, and we're going to talk about the lepers. The lepers saved the day in 2 Kings chapter 7, and we're going to take a look at that. We're going to kind of examine what does this have to do with maybe some things happening in our day. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But the idea of the Way Wednesdays is for us to come together, for you guys to write in questions. We're going to be taking lots of questions, and we want to make this interactive. And I want you to know, some people have said, why don't we do this on Zoom? I just want you to know that there's always a kind of a trade-off, all right? So Pastor Gary and I really want to take as many questions as we can. Sometimes when we open it up to everybody, then everybody's talking, all right? And so we were trying to find that happy place, that happy medium, so that we keep it interactive, but this way we don't have somebody who maybe shouldn't be saying as much, saying too much. So that's what that is. Hey Gary, it's such a pleasure to have you here, man.
Well, you handled that very well.
Well, thank you. I started to dig myself a hole. I'm like, how do I get out of this thing?
Well, what I like about the Way Wednesdays, and as we kind of move into kind of a little bit of a different phase of the Way Wednesdays, because when you and I talked about, well, what can we do as we move into this virtual reality, and folks, unfortunately, we were on a call with the governor of the state of Colorado yesterday, and it looks like we are going to be meeting virtually for at least the month of May. So we're kind of settling in and getting used to this. But part of this is, Doug, you and I recall we had this conversation about, well, how do we engage people? How do we keep people in the Word throughout the week? And of course, we talked about Torah Tuesdays, which was an every other week interactive kind of Bible study with a small group. And we said, well, why don't we just move that to Wednesday? So we're not doing Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and you have the Awakening Report several times a week, and then incorporating Friday nights and so on and so forth. And so the last couple of weeks for the Way Wednesday, we've been dealing kind of with topical issues related to Passover and counting the Omer. But now those are kind of in the past. Well, we're still counting the Omer, but so we're sort of merging Torah Tuesdays and the Way Wednesdays so we could talk about the weekly Parsha. So that gives everybody a chance to read the portion coming up for this week, and then be engaged in the conversation and ask questions, add insights and things like this. We would do this once a month when we met physically at the Way in Lakewood, and we would call it Shabbat Plus. So we would come in, we'd have praise and worship, we'd have our regular service, Doug's teaching, and then we'd have oneg. And after everyone had eaten and been satisfied, give thanks to the Lord for the sustenance and for the land, then we would just open up the scriptures. And we typically go to the Torah portion for that week, and we would Midrash. And it would just be a great time of fellowship and study and rabbit trails and things like that. So the Way Wednesdays is really kind of an offshoot of Shabbat Plus. So we'll call it Wednesdays Plus. And that's what we really do want to encourage, is kind of these rabbit trails that are not just like kind of out in left field, like, well, what do you think about this topic or that topic? No, let's keep it on the topic of the Torah portion, but there is just a wealth of material there. We also include, of course, the Haftorah portion. So for those of you who got the notification I sent out earlier, you notice that it is a double portion. So we have twice as much scripture to
Yeah.
To delve into, and
Yeah.
a couple times a year, the portions are doubled up to make room to get through the entire Torah in the course of a year. So this is one of those weeks where
Yeah.
the portions are combined to actually talk about two similar topics. Leviticus 12:1 through 15:33, and it talks about leprosy and becoming clean. So very, very
Yeah.
closely related topics and timely, I think, too.
Indeed.
Although we don't have
Yeah.
leprosy, there's a lot of people going around with
Yeah.
disease
No
and
kidding. Hey,
quarantine.
before we get into it, I just want to give a shout out to some people. We got Elizabeth Evers. She says, Erev Tov. Shalom, Elizabeth. We got Rhonda. She says, Shalom. We have Shemazite. Shalom, all and blessings in Yeshua the King. Amen to that. It's not easy to read the parasha because of the animal slaughter. I always have a hard time reading that. I understand. I appreciate that. We got Thomas Burke from Costa Rica. He says, Shalom, blessings. Jacqueline is saying shalom. She's in New Jersey. And so we're so glad to have her as well. And shalom from Phil and Sally. Very cool. Great to have you guys. We got Carolinda from Michigan, and we got my mom, Janice Hamp. So here locally in the Denver area. So fantastic. And we've got Keith Prophet. Shalom Aleichem. Awesome. We got Sam Williams, fantastic. Indianapolis, Indiana. This is really fun to get to know where everybody's from. So we're definitely taking a different pace, kind of a different flavor to this whole thing. And so again, we're just trying to say, you know what? The world's given us lemons. We're going to make lemonade, and that's just all there is to it. Let's get into the portion. What do you say, Gary?
Let's
Should
do
we
it.
just jump right in? And guys, if you have questions, please post them. We really want your questions because, we're going to kind of be doing the talking, but we want you guys to pose the questions, and that will give us those nice little rabbit trails so we can go this way and that. All right, so we are in. We're going to start in 2 Kings. Is that right?
No, let's start with the Haftarah portion because I think this is an absolutely fascinating story, and I think it's very relevant for kind of the things we're experiencing right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
did you want to read, Doug?
I'll put it up on the screen. Why don't you go ahead and read?
Okay, great. So it's a relatively short passage. So I'll just go ahead and read the entire thing, and then we'll open it up for questions. We'll discuss it ourselves. So I'm going to be reading 2
Okay.
Kings chapter 7, verses 3 through 20. Now there were 4 leprous men at the entrance of the gate, and they said to one another, "Why are we sitting here until we die? If we say we will enter the city, the famine is in the land, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also." And let me pause there, Pastor Doug, because maybe you want to paint a little bit of context. What's going on here? There's not just 4 leprous guys sitting out at the gate. There's something going on.
Right. Yeah. The king of Syria, not Assyria, but the king of Syria, was laying siege to Samaria, and as is very typical in siege warfare, the people in the city would shut the gates, and they could quite well defend themselves from any kind of onslaught. The trouble is that once you've closed the doors and such, you cannot go back out to get more food. You have to just eat whatever you have in your city. And if a siege would go on for quite a while, then people would start to run out of food, and it got pretty ugly. And so you have this prophecy that was given that a thing of bread would be sold for a shekel, and that God was going to provide. Sadly, you had people committing cannibalism and other yucky stuff. But that was all part of the thing. And the reason that they were there is because they had not been following what God told them to do again and again and again. And so that's one reason that we see this happening. So now, of course, the lepers are outside. They were practicing their social distancing by being outside. And they had to actually go around and they have to say, unclean, unclean, and let people know that they were coming. And it's kind of funny how sometimes people are like, well, this seems so weird. How can this happen? And yet, now that we're into this coronavirus and with all the social distancing and wearing masks, etc., we can now begin to understand the mentality that you have somebody here that is very well, not very contagious, but could be contagious, and they were definitely unclean, and so this was the thing that was happening. Yeah.
And if before I continue reading, thanks for that, Doug. That really helps us understand why the lepers are outside the gate. Well, they wouldn't necessarily be outside the gate anyway, but why there was famine inside the gate, and they didn't want to go in there because they knew things were just as bad off in there. But if I could also take another moment and give a shameless plug for our Israel trip, which we are planning in April of 2021. A couple of things that we saw the last time that we went were these underground water tunnels where they would build a tunnel, where the Israelites would build a tunnel outside of the city to the well, disguise it so that they could bring water inside the city in the event of a siege. So, well, they would store up food, probably toilet paper, like most of us have done. We stored up our food and our toilet paper and such. But if our water got cut off, we would be in trouble pretty quickly. So we actually saw this at Tel Megiddo. We also saw it in Jerusalem through Hezekiah's tunnel, where there were tunnels dug underground. We were able to actually walk through them. And if you come with us in April of 2021, you'll be able to walk with us in these same places and look at this fascinating history. So very, very interesting. I'll continue reading then, picking up in verse 5. And they rose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. And when they had come to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, to their surprise, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of chariots and the noise of horses, the noise of a great army. So they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to attack us. Therefore they arose and fled at twilight and left the camp intact, their tents, their horses, and their donkeys. And they fled for their lives. And when these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they went into one tent, and they ate and drank and carried from it silver and gold and clothing, and went and hid them. Then they came back and entered another tent, and they carried some from there also, and went and hid it. Then they said to one another, we are not doing right. This day is a day of good news, and we remain silent. If we wait until morning light, some punishment will come upon us. Now therefore, come, let us go and tell the king's household. So they went and called to the gatekeepers of the city and told them, saying, we went to the Syrian camp, and surprisingly, no one was there, not a human sound, only horses and donkeys tied, and the tents intact. And the gatekeepers called out, and they told it to the king's household inside. So the king arose in the night and said to his servants, let me now tell you what the Syrians have done to us. They know that we are hungry. Therefore they have gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the field, saying, when they come out of the city, we shall catch them alive and get into the city. And when one of his servants answered and said, please, let several men take 5 of the remaining horses, which are left in the city. Look, they may either become like all the multitude of Israel that are left in it, or indeed, I say that they may become like all the multitude of Israel left from those who are consumed. So let us send them and see. Therefore they took 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent them in the direction of the Syrian army, saying, go and see. And they went after them to the Jordan. And indeed, all the road was full of garments and weapons which the Syrians had thrown away in their haste. So the messengers returned and told the king. Then the people went out and plundered the tents of the Syrians. So a seah of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley was for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. Now the king had appointed the officer on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate. But the people trampled him in the gate, and he died, just as the man of God had said, who spoke to him when the king came down to him. So it happened just as the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 seahs of barley for a shekel, and a seah of fine flour for a shekel shall be sold tomorrow about this time in the gate of Samaria. Then that officer had answered the man of God and said, Now look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could such a thing be? And he had said, In fact, you shall see it with your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. So it happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gate, and he died.
Wow. That's
I know.
that's some great stuff. Great stuff in there. Yeah. So what an interesting portion. I'm struck by how the lepers who were outcasts from society realized that they still needed to do the right thing. You know, they were hiding things, and they're like, "Wait a second, we can't do this. This wouldn't be right." So, I mean, this is what we call integrity, right? This is what we do when no one is looking is kind of the definition of integrity. Do we do the right thing when nobody's looking? If so, we're integrity. Have integrity. We're integritous. If we don't, then we don't have integrity. And these guys understood that there was a principle that they had an obligation to tell people about the good news. That's kind of a cool thing, isn't it?
I think it's fabulous, because they could have easily gone through and just had whatever they wanted, taken it away. They could have been wealthy when they got their diseases were gone. They could have been set for life, but they did choose to do the right thing. I think this is a good example of what it means to be part of a community as well, even if you're for some reason not able to fully integrate into the community. And we know that you could become ceremoniously unclean for any number of reasons. Women at certain times during their menstrual cycle, both men and women, if they come in contact with certain items, would be unclean for a period of time. And so this was not an uncommon necessarily aspect of life.
And
And
let me just throw something in there, because somebody was asking me the other day, because there was a kind of a standard Christian who was challenging him about the law, and he's like, "Look, we don't have to keep it because the law says that you become guilty if you touch a human body, and or something that's dead or whatever." And I think people, and I had the same thing. I had a fundamental misunderstanding about something that's unclean and the purpose of the mikvah. It's really simple. All right. So just imagine if you were going along and you went and you touched some roadkill. You might feel that your hands are kind of dirty. Okay. Or if you went and you touched a dead human body, you don't know how long it had been there, but you touched this body. I would have a real sense to wash my hands, okay? Or if you're a parent and your child, your little baby, needs a new diaper and it's sprayed everywhere and it got on your hands, okay? Hopefully, if you use the bathroom, then you should do something with your hands, right? And right now, we really understand with all of the COVID-19 stuff, we're talking about how important it is to wash our hands. So, washing and being dirty. The trouble is we throw in this word ceremonial, but there isn't a word ceremonial in Hebrew. There's no such word. It's just you're dirty. And so that's why God said to wash, because you're dirty. So let's say that you're working at a hospital and you have a patient who has COVID-19 and you touch this person without any kind of protection. Guess what? You are guilty. All right. I put that in air quotes, guilty. All right. Because what it means is that this happened to you. You did this. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It's not a moral statement. It's just this is what happened, that you are now guilty of you're guilty of this thing happening in your life. If you're a nurse and you get stuck with a needle that has HIV or something, you're guilty of that. Doesn't mean that it's your fault. It means that this is now part of your life experience, and you have to bear the consequences of this. And so I think part of the trouble, Gary, is that we're so far removed from this. We don't have a good sense of what it really means to be guilty. Even with, a woman in her monthly flow, it doesn't mean that she's a bad person. It just means that she's got blood. Okay. Which, call it cooties, call it germs, whatever we want to call it, whether it's the menstrual, the period, whether it's touching a dead body or whatever it may be, it's just yucky. Okay. It's dead body stuff, and that needs to be washed off. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about how being clean and unclean. So the things you can't do when you're unclean, you can't go in the temple. You're supposed to maybe have some time alone, some social distancing, to give time for these various germs to wear off. Yes, you are supposed to wash and then still be isolated for a bit. So God, so brilliant, he puts these things in place so that we will practice these. And if we do, then we will see far less disease. I mean, it's amazing how in the Middle Ages, when you had the Black Plague going around, the Jews, by and large, were experiencing it much less than the general population. Why? Because washing their hands was very much a part of their culture. You might say they did it religiously, right? And now we're told to do it religiously because we want to try to save lives. God's like, look, just do this stuff and it'll go better for you. But we've thrown so much of that away, and we face the consequences, sadly.
And I think another aspect of that too is we don't, sort of in our day and age, we we kind of lose touch of things. We live in a really sanitized world, and it's rare for us to come in contact with a dead body. We have people that do that. We have funeral directors. We have coroners that do all that. So we don't necessarily come in contact with things that make us unclean in such a way. We have a lot of sanitary products. My wife, I remember she told me the story. A good friend of hers, her family owned a funeral parlor, and they went up and picked up a gentleman who was, like in his 90s. He passed away. He was at a nursing home, and he was being transported back to the funeral home. And it was a family business, so they had their kids in the hearse with them, and it turned out that the guy who passed away from chickenpox, and 10 days later, their children came down with chickenpox. So that dead body, the body, even though the gentleman was dead, was still able to transmit disease.
That's
just
right.
because of bumping in the car,
Yep.
air expiring,
Yep.
or and but we don't deal with that because we hire that stuff out. We buy products for things. We have gloves and all this other kind of stuff. So we don't have a good sense of going in the mikvah. Now we wash our hands, but we don't have a sense in daily life of what it means to, we shower every day.
Yeah.
So we're quite a bit removed from what I think everyday life
Yep.
was, certainly in the first, second century,
Yeah,
much less
and
before.
I think the COVID virus has really heightened our awareness of this because, we have a problem of how to bury the bodies, right? It's a dangerous job, right? And from the reports I've read, that even a dead body can still transmit the coronavirus. That's why they're burying these guys in hazmat suits, because there's a real danger because of it. And so again, I mean, when you think about it, God didn't tell people about germs and the microbiome, if you will. He didn't tell anybody about any of that stuff, right? He didn't tell us about what's happening in the microbiological world. He just said, "Do it. Just just do this stuff, okay? And look, if you touch a dead body, then you gotta quarantine, basically. You gotta wash and you gotta quarantine. And it makes sense. Don't go in the temple because guess what? That's a place where there's lots of people, right? I mean, when we start to break it down, it's like, oh, this makes so much sense. Why didn't I just listen to God? It would have been so much easier if I had done that from the beginning. But we don't, right? And so we unfortunately face the consequences. I'm thinking about right now how there's probably an economic crisis that is brewing, and God says that every 7 years we need to forgive debts. Of course, we don't do that, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? That wouldn't work for our world. But guess what? Now we're doing it, right? Uh, and if we don't, then we're going to have an even bigger problem down the road if we don't do that. God says to let the land lay fallow. Well, guess what? Right now, suddenly the land is laying fallow. God says to take a day off once a week. Well, we don't do that. Well, guess what? Now we're all stuck at home. You almost get the impression that God's like, okay, you guys, I've been checking the list here, and you're really backed up on your payments. All right. I mean, if he was willing to send Judah out of the land because they had a debt of 490 years that they did not let the land lay fallow, so they had to pay it all in one lump sum of 70 years of exile. And Jeremiah said that after the 70 years, he would bring them back so that the land could have its rest. And you're like, really? I mean, wow, right? And I just get this feeling that God's like, I don't know. I mean, again, I'm not God, but just putting these dots together, I'm like, I get the sense that he's saying, you guys have a pretty big debt to pay, and so we're going to have to pay some of the stuff back right now.
Going along the lines of you're talking about the lepers that go out to these tents and eat and drink and realize that, hey, the army's gone. What really struck me, aside from their acting with integrity, is like waking up and realizing this, is that they knew that they had to share the good news. And when I heard that, it's like, well, they're sharing the gospel. It's
Yep.
like
And
going
it's the same
back.
word. It's the same
Yes.
word, the seah. Yeah, it's the same
And,
word.
and so I thought, wow, what a beautiful picture there. It's like when they come upon this gift that just out of nowhere, this miracle that appears
Yep.
before them, where before they were facing certain death if they went into the gates, death
Yep.
if they went into the it's like, and
Yeah.
it's like how many people is at their moment of salvation? It's like
Mm-hmm.
any choice I make is worse than giving myself over to the Lord. It's
Yep.
like, oh, wow, really? Oh, good
Right.
thinking. So let's do
Yeah.
it. And then when they
Yeah.
find it, it's like, oh my gosh, you're just on fire. They got to go share the good news.
Right.
They got to go
Right.
share the gospel. I thought that was a great
Yeah.
response.
That's a great word. And just for those Hebrew aficionados out there, it is the same word. This is a day of good news. They say Hayom Hazeh Yom Besorah, and so that day is good news. That's the word. Besorah is good news. So that's a beautiful picture, right? And that's the thing when we have something that we're so excited and passionate to share. You have to share. You're like, if I don't share the good news that there's life. People are dying right now, but there's life. There's life right now. There's an abundance that God has just miraculously given us. If I don't share that, it won't be right. And I'm really just kind of sobered a little bit about how significant that really is. And this is part of being a disciple of the Lord, is that we want people to know the good news that there's life. You may be facing death, and being apart from God, outside of a relationship with Him, is death essentially. But we have this incredibly good news, this exciting news that God has made a way. He's provided a remedy for us. And so we want to share that. It's something that ought to be coming out of us just as a natural reaction to the good provision that God has made on our behalf. We want to share that with others.
Hey,
Yeah.
Doug, I want to take just a moment and give a shout out to Judy Gallagher from Nova Scotia and let you know that we're praying for your healing in your community after that terrible shooting that took place up there a couple of days ago. So our hearts are out for you and those in your community.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well said. I'm looking through to see if there's any questions. I don't see any questions yet, but although Keith was asking what's the name of the gentleman, this is Gary. Or no, that's Gary. There we go. Trying to find the right side. Yeah. So this is Pastor Gary. He does wonderful things at the Way congregation. I feel so blessed that he joined the team early, and it's been a lot of fun to work together. So yeah, Pastor Gary and his lovely wife Jeannie, they bless us with so much. So
thank you for that. And hey, Keith, how you doing?
Yeah. Let's see. This is interesting. This is from Tom Burke. He says the word quarantine comes from the Latin word for 40, referring to the 40 days isolation prescribed in the Torah for certain life events. Interesting. That's very interesting. So, yeah, that is really, really interesting. All right.
Well, and those are certainly things that are spoken of in the Torah portion too. And as I was reading and listening to the portion, it just struck me on how our current practice is modeled after the Torah. And we can maybe get there later, but we should continue digging into this text.
Let's do it.
What I find interesting, so it was really dire straits inside the gates. I was reading the chapter prior to chapter 7, and looking at the things you were describing with the cannibalism going on, and donkeys' heads being sold for 80 shekels. It makes me think of how much people shell out for masks and things like that, and how people take advantage of different take opportunities, in times of famine and things like that.
That's right. Think of the crazy price of hand sanitizer, right? The first couple of weeks of this virus.
Right.
I mean, people were just price gouging like there was no tomorrow.
Yeah, if you could even find it. And then you look at the price of gas today, and it's when you're under attack, and the Samaritans were definitely under attack. I mean, they were in siege. It takes your economy in a whole different direction, and your value system turns upside down.
That's right.
Or maybe it becomes more aligned with what is really important.
I was reading this article a while ago, and it was saying, if you looked around America right now, you'd think that we're all extremely conservative people because we're all homeschooling. There's no opportunity for people to cheat on their spouse because you can't exactly say that you were staying late at work. You can't go get a hotel room. I mean, it was kind of like, wow, that's pretty insightful. We're just having a lot more family time and all kinds of stuff. And it's amazing how quickly God can get us to change our perspectives, our actions, our habits. And if we would only just do what he's telling us to do on a regular basis, then I am convinced we would not have these kind of plagues. God said, if you will keep my commandments, then you will have none of the Egyptian plagues. None of them. But we have them all the time. And what's happened is we just have gotten used to them. We think that this is par for the course. And this is just the way things go. But God's like, no, That is not the case. That you will not have these things if you follow my word. I'm convinced that if we kept the Sabbath, if our country took Saturday off and we didn't work, we didn't have everything open, we didn't have Walmart open and everything open. Um, maybe the ER doctor should stay on call and the fireman, okay? But otherwise, we have we shut down and we allow things to rest. We allow there to be a reset. I'm convinced we wouldn't have uh, so many of the ills that we have right now, possibly including the coronavirus itself. This is a question from Keith. I just want to kind of throw this one in really quick. He says, "Does Israel today, as a nation, allow the land to rest once a week, or do you mean maybe once every 7 years?" I think is what you meant, Keith. To my knowledge, they don't. Gary, do you know anything about that? I'm pretty sure they don't allow it to rest every 7 years, but I'm not sure.
There are if the farm is in the possession of a observant Jew, they do let it rest.
Okay.
There is a national stockpile that they store up for every seventh year, so that they can draw from that stockpile when the harvest um, isn't that great. And of course, that's the commandment. It's like till the ground, and then in the last year, kind of like on the Shabbat, you got a double portion of manna in the wilderness. There's like a bumper crop that they would allow to store up. Well, the same thing is practiced in Israel today. Now, I'm sure that there's other. It's not throughout Israel. There are farms in Palestinians' hands that don't observe the sabbatical year. There are probably non-observant farmers that may go contrary to what the Torah says. But
do you think most farmers are doing that, or
I do think most farmers are doing that. Yeah, I think most are, and it's kind of a peer pressure thing too.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past some of the observant ones to maybe make sure that others are following the rules properly. A lot of peer pressure goes on at times.
Very cool. Very good.
Yeah, some would call it sabotage. Others would call it peer pressure.
Like driving through Mea Shearim on a Sabbath. Bad idea. Bad idea. Yeah. They will throw rocks at your car. I never did it. I only heard the reports.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's keep going.
Did you see the question from Carolinda? Carolinda asks, should we take on any vaccine that eventually comes up for this COVID-19? We don't know whom to trust anymore, but those who are supposed to be the medical experts. So that's a tough question.
That is a tough question. Yeah. It's a very tough question. And I'll tell you, Gary, I feel like we're so divided right now between right and left, Republican, Democrat. I've been stressing this in my teachings. I'm going to say it again. The Democrats are not all Satanists, and the Republicans are not all saints. All right. I think if we have that mentality, we're going to get duped, seriously duped. All right. So, look, I kind of look at some of this COVID-19 stuff, and I'm like, it's really weird. Did it start in a Chinese lab? I don't know. Okay, I don't know. I have not gone to China. I have not interviewed people. I don't have access to the data. I can only read, and I try to read, some more liberal kind of stuff, more conservative kind of stuff to get a balance. But I think what happens is people say, well, I'm a Christian, so therefore I'm going to only watch something or other news, or I'm only going to read this particular slant on a discussion. And then we start getting so deep down some of these alternative perspectives, call them conspiracy theories, that we can get really confused. Now, I get confused too because I don't want to stick my head in the sand. I want to have a good sense of what is really going on, but I don't know. I just I don't think I or I don't suppose anybody can have all the facts on this. So then the question boils down to, do we believe that uh, the thousands and thousands of doctors and nurses and people that are in the know that have an understanding, are they all trying to pull the wool over our eyes? I find that really hard to swallow. Okay, I just really do. I find it hard to swallow that idea. So, though I do have some questions about it, I also want to kind of make sense of it. Let's kind of go back a couple years, a little time machine here. Let's go back to uh, September 11th, 2001. All right, that was a pretty big year, right? Where you had 9/11, right? You had the fall of the Twin Towers, and um, we have a friend, a friend's father who is a big industrialist in Germany. The day that it happened, he came out and said that he lost employees on those planes. All right, and I'm like, well, okay, interesting. So then, so be some maybe a year or two later, I started getting these videos thrown in my face about how 9/11 was actually an inside job, and I watched a lot and read a lot about the inside job. Okay, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of holes in the official story. But then I thought, but not everything, right? Because I know somebody who lost employees when they crashed into these buildings. So all I'm trying to say, without getting onto all the conspiracy theories in the world, is that there could be something true about some of the conspiracy theories, but it doesn't mean that everything's true, right? There could definitely be some parts that are like, this doesn't really make sense. Maybe I'm not getting the truth all the time, but I'm getting some of the truth a lot of the time. And I think that is where we have to pray and we have to be wise. So when it comes to should we take a you're asking this question of whether we should take a vaccine or not. Well, here's what I'm going to suggest is that let's cross that bridge and then we'll discuss what we should do. At this point, I don't know. Okay, I don't know. But instead of kind of trying to predict what could happen, because lots of things could happen, and it's so hard for us to predict. One of the things that we learn in Krav Maga is not to try to anticipate what someone's going to do, but just be ready for when they do it, right? So that we're not, we're not trying to see the punch coming or anticipate what we think the guy is going to do, but when we see it coming, then we react. And so that's what I would suggest we do is when we see the next part of this thing, then let's react to that. Let's react in prayer. Let's get together and let's talk about it. So if in several weeks' time or a few months' time, we're told everyone has to take a vaccine, Gary and I will get on this show and we'll discuss the ramifications of, to take it or not to take it. And we can at least share some ideas. We can dig into the Bible and get a sense of what maybe we should do. But since it's not a present reality, I would suggest that we just leave that one until we have to. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Gary?
No, it's it's one of the things that uh, is really unique in this circumstance because this is a worldwide event. This is not a vaccine that I think will be only for the United States or a vaccine that is, so we see vaccines being developed in the U.S., in Canada, in Israel, in the Netherlands, in China, in Japan. So it's not it doesn't look like it's a single source vaccine. Um, and I don't think any of them have it figured out. Do I think that all of them are in cahoots in some kind of worldwide um, um, conspiracy? I'm not convinced that that's the case either. Although I'm wary of what some people may be up to. What I certainly don't like to see is how we are being conditioned, and that I think there's definitely social experiments that are going on to see how we respond in certain types of circumstances. And I see that in the language that is coming out. My wife heads a COVID task force for the Way congregation. Her and a couple of the nurses and nurse practitioners that are in the congregation get together and they pay attention to the news and they kind of discuss it, and then they inform Doug on what their recommendation is on how we should proceed. And there's a weekly conference call that the governor has with clergy and pastors, rabbis across the state. And it's really interesting to listen to their language as they were moving from stay at home to safer at home. And you say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean we can get out and about? No, you're safer at home. Well, how's that different from stay at home? Well, it's not really, but it's like some language to kind of pacify you, to say, oh, we're making progress, when actually we're looking at another month of doing the same thing we've been doing, which is very frustrating. I heard on the news broadcast this morning, it's like, because the kind of the headlines is, oh, they're going to lift the stay-at-home orders. Well, they said, oh, the stay-at-home orders have shifted, not lifted. So we end up in this situation where I think there's definitely some social manipulation going on, and we see people getting upset about it too. How that translates into a vaccine, and kind of going back to what is it biblically? What should we do? It's hard to find a precedent with that in Scripture, and so we want to be aware. And again, I think what's nice is we can be aware globally rather than just aware locally. And we do that because not only do we have the internet and multiple sources and news feeds from all over, although the media anywhere is, got to take it with a grain of salt. But it's not just restricted to, Donald Trump and his cronies get to make up their mind, or this other group and their cronies get to make up their mind. I think it's going to be a little more complex than that, and difficult to deal with. So anyway,
that's a great word. That's a great word. And I think we really want to underscore, let's not be afraid. The Lord is our strong tower. He's our shield. He goes before us. He will make a way. And you know what? The Bible does talk about martyrs. And if that is what our calling is, well, I'm not excited about it, but you know what? The Lord will be with us. And quite frankly, Gary, when the church, the believers, whatever we want to call ourselves, the Keilah, when we go through tough times, guess what? We get stronger, we get purified, right? I mean, you hear and read the testimonies of people that have been then either tortured for their faith or killed, martyred, whatever, somehow they suffered for their faith, and the body of Christ got stronger, it got cleaner. Talk about being clean, right? I mean, that's one of the things that we're told is that kind of clean up our act. I mean, those 7 churches, congregations in Revelation 2 and 3 are all about, you're doing okay here, but you're kind of missing this over here. Only Philadelphia didn't get any bad marks, but everybody else, well, Smyrna did okay, but still everybody else had something going on. He's like, I see you're doing here, and I see your labor and all this stuff. Good job, right? But you left your first love. You've got this woman called Jezebel in here who's telling everybody how to do all this bad stuff, and you got to knock it off. If you don't, when I come back, I'm taking your candlestick away. So that's kind of where we are. So I think we can watch the news. Look, I watch the news a lot. I really want to know what's going on. I watch especially a lot of the economic news. I find that very interesting. It's also kind of scary. All right, so you can, you shouldn't watch too much of that before you go to bed because you'll have but you know what? If, and this is a big if this is the beginning of the end, if these are the four horsemen coming, whatever you want to call this, well, this is what we've been talking about forever, right? We can't kick the can down the road forever. If we believe that Jesus is coming and all indicators tell us that we're so close, I don't know. Is this it? I have no idea. But maybe this is an opportunity for us to get ready. If this isn't it, then this is a practice run. This is an opportunity for us to get serious about our faith. We need to be those lepers that are like, wait a second, today is a day of good news.
Mhm.
We want to tell people that there is salvation, that there's hope, there's a rescue, that life is available. This world is coming to an end. We know that. And if we believe that, if we're passionate about that, then let's make that our number one thing is to share this with people. Let's share it with people. You know what? Yeah, the world is ugly, but God is good. He's coming, and this world is coming to an end. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to end one of these days, and God is on the throne, and He's calling you, He's calling me to have a meaningful relationship with Him. There's so much in this passage. It,
Well,
it,
and
it's great.
that's the other thing I see as well. Not only in the early church that we read about, but also even in this Haftorah portion that we read, is that they were not naive
Mhm.
and they acted
Mhm.
shrewdly.
Yes,
The king, what does he do when he hears the good news? Does he
right.
just buy it, hook, line, and sinker? He says, "No, we
Mm-hmm.
better investigate this because they could be laying a trap for us."
Mm-hmm.
So,
Good word.
we
Yeah.
got a couple witnesses here, but let's check it out. Let's not just blindly go into things. And I think that's a word for us today too. Is let's
Yeah.
not be naive. And I don't think anybody that sits under Doug's teaching is naive, or they wouldn't put up with his teaching, because it is too in depth and detailed, and and it is too.
Do something. Oh yeah. I don't know if I lost you there, Gary, or maybe you're still talking and I'm not hearing. Um, I'm not sure what's happening. But once we get you back, Gary, I hope you will continue that thought. But that is a great word. That really is a great word, is that the king sent people out. They didn't have very many resources left, but he sent people out to go and to investigate. That was important. So, when it comes to coronavirus, any potential vaccine that could come along, let's check it out. All right, let's check it out. Part of checking it out is to really dig into sources, to get several witnesses, maybe witnesses from different perspectives that are saying this. So that's super important. One of the things that I really strive to do when I'm teaching is to have multiple witnesses that are saying the same thing. That's why I give so many scripture references, because I want you guys to see that I'm not making this up, that scripture is replete with this particular idea. And if I cannot find any scripture, I'm going to say, you know what? This is just my hunch. But if I can find maybe one scripture, I'll say, well, this is what I found, and I think this is what it means. But what if I can find four or five, then I'm like, this is what it says. I mean, there's no question about it. This is what it says. I don't think we have to debate it at all. We have it here, 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 and here. So that is why I like to give so many scriptures, just to really show you guys that there's overwhelming stuff in scripture. I hope Gary's going to make it back. I presume he is going to. Sometimes, the internet does what the internet does. So here I'm going to take a question from Tolly. Shalom from Washington State. Question, is there any info perhaps from other biblically endorsed sources who were the four men outside the gates, what tribe they were from, and their life afterward? Well, we don't know. They must have been part of the northern kingdom because they were hanging out just outside Samaria, right? So Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom, and so they presumably would have been from one of the 10 northern tribes. Uh, I don't think we have any other evidence. I'm not aware of any other sources that talk about those. If somebody else knows, let me know. But I don't believe there are any other sources on that particular thing. All right, this is from Blake. He says, if you touch a question, if you touch a clean animal, you are unclean until evening. I feel it is referring to approaching the holy things, and how would that apply to us today? Blake, I think you're absolutely right. But again, let's keep in mind that the word holy means to be set apart. So in this case, it was referring to you are no longer holy, or you cannot do some of the holy things, such as going into the temple. Why? Because you're contaminated. That's really what it is. God's laws, now you might say, well, God just gave us laws because that's what he wanted to do. I think we can make that argument. I'm less persuaded that that's the case. I think God is incredibly rational. I think that God is not just giving us rules to just to see if we'll just blindly do them. I think he wants us to do them, but I don't think they're just random ad hoc kind of rules. That God is a good father and he tells us to do or not to do certain things because that is the best thing for us. Hey, there you are.
My internet completely dropped out. And
I didn't even make any jokes about Kansas or anything. So.
yeah, well, I think the hamster stopped running around in his little wheel.
So I was just in the middle of answering Blake's question. You can see it there on the screen. But he's asking about unclean animals. You're unclean if you touch an unclean animal, you're unclean until evening. How does that affect us today? And I was saying that I think God is very rational. He doesn't just give us these random rules to just see if we'll do them. He does want us to keep his rules. But the reason he would say, if you touch an unclean animal, you're unclean until evening. Again, it has to do with germs. It has to do with very practical, real stuff that, of course, nobody had any idea. Even up until the late 1800s, people didn't understand about germs. They did not understand about the microbial world. It just wasn't part of anything, right? They had no concept about this. So we owe a lot of this to the microscope that was invented in the 1600s in Holland. I forget the guy that invented it. And then they started looking under and started seeing all these little creatures. And then finally somebody realized, wait a second, maybe those creatures could be making us sick. And they started putting two and two together, and sure enough, right? So we're only discovering God's handiwork. So he gives us some house rules. Look at guys, if you touch a dead animal, you're unclean till evening. Right? He doesn't say, look, the reason is because really, really small, you can't see this stuff, but there's like all these little tiny little creatures, and some of them, if they come in contact with you, can make you sick. He doesn't say that, but now we know, and this is God's world, and God is giving us good hygiene. So I think it's all about good hygiene. For example, why does God say, if you're going to excrement, please do it outside the camp? Right? Why do you have to do that outside the camp? Just because that's just some weird rule? No, I mean, we know this. Look, you don't defecate in the camp. It doesn't work out well, right? It leads to disease. And you had people in the Middle Ages that would take their bedpans full of all that stuff and pour it out the window in the morning, and you had the streets flowing with this sewage. And guess what? People got sick, right? I mean, hello, right? Today it's like, well, duh, right? Why would they do that? But back then they didn't know, other than it smelled a bit, but they didn't know that open sewage could really make you sick. They just didn't get it. But God did. He knew it. And that's why he said, make sure you put, it's outside the camp, you bury it, etc. So now we have indoor plumbing, and we take that stuff outside the camp, right? And there's so many of these rules that God is just telling us to do. I think we're keeping so many of them. We all do the mikvah most every day, right? We take a shower. That's a mikvah. You get all the dead skin off you, and you know, various things, hair follicles and whatnot, just all that dead stuff and potential disease or bacteria, whatever, and you clean it away. So we're doing a lot of these things without even realizing it, and so that's great. That's really good.
I think it's important to make sure everybody understands that it's not touching an unclean animal that makes you unclean. It's touching the carcass of an unclean animal. For example, you got little fluffy Fido or kitty cat around the house, and obviously you come in contact, you pet them, you play with them, and have a good time. And obviously they're unclean animals, right? They have paws. If you want to take a look at the text, this is part of our Torah portion, is Leviticus 11:24 through 28 really talks about these circumstances here. And and so it's really
up the scripture right now.
Okay. So it's really talking about again, dealing with the dead bodies of these animals that brings about the uncleanness. And are these animals, when they're dead, any filthier than other animals? Clean animals when they're dead? Well, obviously you're butchering sheep and goats and bulls and oxes and stuff like that as part of the sacrifices. So you're coming in contact with those, and you can bet that they used good techniques for kosher slaughter and draining the blood and cleanliness and things like that involved. So they were probably more accustomed to dealing with those animals, certainly than with the unclean animals. They wouldn't kill or slaughter at all. But so when you come in contact with their dead bodies, who knows what their cause of death was?
Well, and again, Gary, I mean, I think the coronavirus is just putting all this in the spotlight. And again, whether people think it came from a laboratory or not is another discussion. But that there was some kind of that this originated in bats, or there's another little animal. I'm forgetting the name of it. It rolls up. Anyway, I can't think of the name of that animal. But so bats or
Snakes,
snakes, right? Yeah. So it's highly suggested. It's the research I've seen suggests that it probably originated in bats. So here you have the bat is a carrier of COVID-19, presumably, whereas a sheep probably wouldn't be, right? So just by nature of the animals God tells us not to eat, because generally, by and large, they're predatory or they're scavengers, or there's something in their biology that doesn't make them healthy for us to eat. And so, by not going near those animals, by not consuming them, but definitely staying away from them after they've been dead, and we don't know how they became roadkill, but just staying away from them is a much safer proposition. It's so highlighted in what's happening in our day right now that why don't we just keep his commandment?
Doug, one of the other aspects of this Torah portion or the half Torah portion that we read that really struck me in terms of what we're dealing with now is where in verse 19 it said the guy who got trampled, he said that the officer had asked the man of God, this is the man of God is Elisha in this case. Now look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven open, could such a thing be? And it's like, how many times have we asked ourselves, how in the world did we get to this situation when just a few short weeks ago, it was life is normal, and now everything is topsy-turvy. People have lost their jobs. I just got a check from the government in the mail. If somebody would have told me that I would have gotten a check from the government, without any strings attached, for no reason, it was like, yeah, okay, I'll believe that when I see it. And I would have been the one getting trampled, right?
Right.
It just floored me when I read that, and it's like, how can we sell short the hand of God? And we do it all the time.
Yep. Yeah. And I want to again encourage people. I'm just kind of looking through some of the conversation in the chat, and guys, I get it. I've been watching all the Chinese social credit system kind of stuff, and what are the ramifications of this or that, and it all may happen. But let's not be afraid. Okay, let's not be afraid. We serve the Most High God. We serve the Most High God, right? And just as this officer who's like, even if could he open the windows of heaven, right? There's no way this can happen. Look, God can provide, period, right? He can provide. And we should believe it. So if we see the world going to hell in a handbasket, okay. Should we be afraid? No, we should not be afraid. And that's what I think is the big danger of all the conspiracy kind of stuff. I'm not necessarily challenging to say it's not true. I think a lot of it is true. But what happens is it makes us paranoid. It makes us fearful. And we forget that, okay, if all these things are happening, God is still on the throne. He still loves you. He's going to take care of you. Now, part of it is we are so unaccustomed to just any kind of pain and suffering that the thought of pain and suffering is like, oh no, I can't do that. But you know what? If that is the destiny that is that is ahead of us, God will be with us. He'll provide. If we get thrown into the fire, either we burn up or he makes a way. Either way, we're not going to bend our knee to the world. We're not going to be afraid of the world. And even if all the conspiracies are true, we're not going to be afraid. So I really want to encourage people, don't be afraid. This is not the time to fear. This is the time to say, you know what? God is for me. What can man do?
And I hate to break this to pretty much everybody on this call. This is not suffering. These are light and momentary inconveniences.
Yes.
I don't want to minimize people who have lost their jobs and things like that, because there is some serious issues that people are dealing with, even people that are sick and on ventilators and so on and so forth. But by and large, for the most of us, we think we're suffering because we can't just run out to, we actually have to go through the drive-through, and we can't sit down and eat at restaurants and things like that. And we can't have our people come and do the things that we're normally accustomed to have done for us, and we've got to do them ourselves. Oh my gosh, I got to learn how to cook. These are light and momentary afflictions, and we need to get our heads on right when it comes to things like that, because there are people suffering. There are people that really put their lives on the line for the sake of the gospel. And let's maintain a perspective.
Yeah. Just looking at the Parashat Shavua again in 2 Kings chapter 7, where did the Syrian army go? Right? They heard something, right? They heard the sound of horses or something, and they thought the Hittite army was coming to slaughter them, and they ran for the hills. That is another miracle, right? Here, God is taking care of his people, but rather than sending lightning bolts from the sky, he makes them imagine that they're hearing something. I don't know if they heard anything. Maybe it was all in their minds. I don't know. But that's the incredible thing, is that in this battle, God has means, technology, if you want to call it that, but he has ways of accomplishing things that we don't know anything about. And this is why we don't want to get into the habit of saying, well, how is God going to do this? That's not our prerogative. Our prerogative is God said that he'll take care of us. I don't know how he's going to do it, but I don't need to worry about that. He's the big engineer in the sky. I'm not. He's the one that can make these things happen. He has the resources to make an entire army that had been sitting outside the gates of Samaria for a long time, so much that women were eating their own children. And then he was able to make those guys go away. He was able to make that army flee, even though no army came against them. That's powerful. That is very powerful stuff. That nothing is too difficult for God. Nothing, right? Absolutely nothing, as the song goes, right? But that's taken from the book of Jeremiah. Nothing is too difficult for thee. Absolutely nothing. Nothing, absolute nothing. Nothing is too difficult for thee. That is what we need to understand and keep our minds fixed on that. Sadly, the northern kingdom had been drifting away from God, and the prophets were trying to get these guys to come back. Look, again, I'm not happy about the deaths. I'm not happy about the unemployment. I'm not happy about a lot of the financial ramifications of what this could mean for all of us. It's not going to be a picnic by any stretch of the imagination. But let's look at some of the fruit that we've already been seeing. People are repenting around the world. People are calling out to God. They're wondering, wait a second, is there something to life that's more important than chasing that almighty dollar? Is there something that I've been missing by not spending more time with my family, more time with my kids? Learning to work in the garden again, or whatever it is. Or, here we started baking. My wife did. I haven't. But my wife has been baking bread, and it's delicious. And so, that's a wonderful thing that, we're changing. We're doing different things. And so this is how God can use a crisis. I mean, if ever there were a crisis, right? You have an army outside the gates that wants to kill you. In the gates, you have hunger and pestilence. I mean, it was dire. And then, it all just turned on a dime. It turned on a dime. And then there was an abundance of food and gold and silver and all this stuff that all these guys brought with them when they were coming to fight against Israel. God changed it in a moment. Amazing.
I find it interesting that it's not recorded that the lepers hear anything. Certainly they were nearby, but they didn't hear the sound of armies and horses and chariots and things like that. And I totally agree with you, Doug, is that we recognize that God's hand is in all of this. And I think that's the word that I'd like to share, is that we need to recognize that this is God working, that he's making these opportunities available to us. Whether we're having a hard time, he's using this to refine us, to refocus us, to recenter us on him. If he's using these circumstances to deliver us, bring salvation to the nations, that we need to recognize that it's his hand at work. It's not our great sermons or oratory skills, or it's like, oh, we got the Way Wednesdays and we're really reaching the multitudes, and we're really rocking it. No, this is all God's doing, and then thank him for it. And Doug, you did a message. It's probably been a year or so now. You guys can find it on YouTube. Is the power of being thankful, and that message has just really resonated with me. And I go back and I look at that, and I just re-ingest that, because the power of Thanksgiving is it not only acknowledges what God has done for you, I think it also opens doors for Him to do more things for you as you have this relationship of thanksgiving with Him. Um, and and It's so important to do that, because then it puts you in another mindset where we're not worried about the next thing that's coming, where we're not always in a Debbie Downer mood, because there is always something to give thanks to the Lord about. And so, Doug, I want to give you a shout out on those, and just something for the folks that are on the call tonight or will be watching this video. It's like, if these messages bless you, then they bless somebody else. Share these with your friends, like them, uh, and get the word out, so that that these messages, and especially go and look at that message on thankfulness, Doug. You probably have the proper name for it. Can direct people to it. Look at it, listen to it, share it with others, and it will bless them. I guarantee you.
Yeah, it's a playlist. It's called The Power of Gratitude.
There you
Yeah,
go.
The Power of Gratitude, and I get into all kinds of fun stuff. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line, it was revolutionary for me, because a lot of the things that I like to talk about are things that I've been discovering myself, right? And the power of gratitude is so important. I used to pray with supplication, right? I used to pray without ceasing, supplicating, "Oh Lord, please do this thing." And I missed that really important phrase for years, with thanksgiving. And it was the with thanksgiving that made all the difference. Because once I started doing that, I'm like, oh, if I am thanking God for something, I can't complain about it. I really can't. I cannot complain. And I think what I used to do was just complain a lot. I used to just say that, why haven't you done this, Lord, or whatever, in a very pious sounding kind of way, of course. Uh, you know, a little bit of, throw a little King James English in there. Oh, Lord,
Thou art the best.
why haven't you granted my supplication yet? But once I started thanking Him for things, then I realized that it's a totally different mindset, because no longer am I questioning why He hasn't done something, but I'm thanking Him for the desired outcome. Which, I tell you, it's kind of a scary thing, because you're like, well, what if I thank Him for it, but then He doesn't do it, right? But that's where faith comes in. That's where I have to say, you know what? I go over the list. God promised to take care of me. He promised to provide for my needs and my family. He promised to um, be my father. He didn't promise to make it easy necessarily. He didn't always promise to give me the answers, the night before everything. He didn't promise that, right? He actually did promise I'd have tribulation in this life, but take courage. He's overtaken the world, right? He's overcome the world. So that now I can just have this sense of rest. I'm just resting, and I'm not worried like I used to be. I used, yeah, I guess I was worried. I was stressed out a bit about why He hadn't answered various things, and I'm just like, you know, God's got it all. He got it all handed out. Now I'm curious. I'm very curious about how it's going to unfold, for sure. I'm really curious about how things will unfold, but I'm not stressed about how they're going to unfold. And what I find is that I go through one crucible, I go through one trial, and I'm like, oh, God was faithful, right? And then I kind of get a pause, and then I get another one. And what I've been learning is to just stay calm in all of these. Just stay calm, and then I don't have these weird spikes, where I'm like on cloud nine today, and then I'm down in the dumps tomorrow. I'm just it's nice to stay calm and know that God has this. He really has this, so I don't have to stress about that.
I think part of that too, Doug, is follow uh, as we follow God, as we follow His words, as we walk as Yeshua walked, that it kind of realigns our expectations or our desires. Our desires is maybe a better way of putting it, so that we're not working 7 days a week, nose to the grindstone to attain that bigger car, the boat, or whatever material thing it is that we really desire, that we really want. It's like, oh, and I know that God wants that for me because he wants me to have all good things. So these are good in my eyes. I think as we begin to walk in his precepts and follow his ways and his commandments, that he sort of realigns our thinking to the way that things that maybe were once important to us are maybe secondary now.
That's right.
And then we find out it's like, wow, what a wonderful thing he's given to us when all of a sudden he blesses us with a $1,200 check from the government. Like, thank you, Lord.
Yeah, we won't talk about what that's going to do to the dollar. But hey, in the short term, it's great.
I am exercising the power of gratitude.
There you go. But even if the dollar should crash, it's like, okay, if the dollar crashes, God is still on the throne, right? And sometimes I think we spend more time trying to ferret out what the enemy is doing, and then get ourselves worked up about that. Because there actually is a drug that goes along with this. It's dopamine, right? When you start looking at fear-based kind of things, whether it's prophecy, right, conspiracies, that you get the same kind of drug as when you open up your Facebook and someone liked what your post. You're like, oh, good, I feel so good. And so then you want to get that next thing. And that's what happens is there's this dopamine rush. You're doping, literally, when you get into all of these scary scenarios. And so I really try to be careful and as to what I consume. And I also try to be very careful as to what I give when I produce on this show, because I don't want to cause fear. I think we want to be like the king here, who sent out people to investigate and have a sense of, okay, what's really happening. We don't want to our heads in the sands, but we also don't want to become the fear base and we're Chicken Little and the sky is falling and all this different stuff. So yeah, we got about 5 minutes, Gary. This has been really great. Any more insights from that text or from Leviticus that kind of stand out to you as we kind of wrap things up here?
Well, so I had a question, because this prophecy that was fulfilled here at the end of the Haftarah portion was was related to sort of the economy, and you've been teaching on Revelation now for a number of weeks, and do you see a parallel in Revelation with kind of the economic realities that people that we're dealing with in the famine, and we see what happened when unbelief came in, and we see what God can do in an instant to release people from their economic woes.
Well, that's a good word, very good word. Yeah, I think the takeaway for us is that it can get really ugly, but God can protect us. We don't. Again, I don't want to make any predictions about whether He's going to allow us to go through things or not. But as we see in this text, it looked bleaker than bleak, and you had every reason to believe that situation would go on. And yet, God was able to turn things around so quickly, and then people, things were back to normal. So, again, whether it's coronavirus or something else, we don't know what the future holds. But this is where we live by faith. This is where we trust, and we don't get all frantic. We don't get all stressed about everything. We just chill out and know that God is in control and that He can provide. He can open the windows of heaven. It's not too difficult for Him. And so I would encourage us to just start praying, Lord, thank you that you're going to provide. If you're out of work right now, If you're not an essential worker and you've gotten laid off, just start praying, Lord, I thank you that you're providing, even now, you're providing for me. Is it maybe a government check? Okay, great. Is it something else? Right? And sometimes we start praying for, Lord, you got to give me this thing exactly. Give me this job in this way on these days and this place. You could do that. I would encourage you to pray, Lord, thank you that you're opening doors that I don't even know about yet, and that you are going to provide. It may require some changes in our lives, but you're going to provide for me and my family, and that we can trust you. And you start thanking him for that, and you thank him every day. And it gets easier. The more you do it, the easier it gets. I know at first you're like, this feels really weird and awkward. But you pray. You pray with thanksgiving. And the more you do that, the more peace you'll have. And peace is a wonderful thing. I know the value of peace and a good night's sleep. So really just rest in this. Know that he is faithful and that he's not going to leave us as orphans. He knows what's happening. And if these are the harbingers of things to come, if these are the hoofbeats of the four horsemen, okay, he told us it was coming. But let's do all that we can to be his ambassadors during this time, and to tell the good news, just like those lepers.
Thanks, Doug. That really spoke to me. So I really appreciate those words of encouragement, and I pray that everybody here tonight just takes those to heart. And those are words to live by. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Garrett. So we have this Friday, we're going to have our Erev Shabbat. That starts at 7 o'clock. We do that on Zoom. Okay, so that is the time when we want to mingle, right? Maybe bring a glass of wine. Gary and Jeannie bless us with the lighting of the candles. That takes maybe about 5 minutes or so. And then the rest of the time, we just hang out, we talk, we share. In fact, last week we started with, hey, tell us your testimony, which I thought was really cool. That was Jacqueline's idea. I thought that was great because a lot of times, we can kind of know each other. We know kind of where people live and maybe their job and how many kids they have. But a lot of times we don't hear, how did you come to know the Lord? And that is always a valuable question. That is so important. So I really enjoyed that. I look forward to hearing more testimonies from people. It's very interactive. I think we went maybe 2.5 hours last time. So it was a lot of fun. So check that out. We have it on our Facebook group. It's in our newsletter, which is, you can write to us at thewaycongregation@gmail.com if you're not on that currently, and we send that out. You can always go to thewaycongregation.com for more information and updates, etc. So thank you, guys. Thank you, Pastor Gary. This is a blessing, a lot of fun, and may the Lord bless you guys in all that you do. He is faithful. Don't forget that. He is faithful. Take care.